Since ancient times, magic has been considered a special art, mastered only by the chosen few, and only a select few dared to touch its mystery. It was said to be a great power bestowed by God himself, but no one knew for sure whether it was true or just a beautiful myth. It was extremely rare to meet a magician in society, but many years later, something unusual happened in the history of the Burial Empire. For the first time, a man who had possessed magical abilities since his youth ascended the throne of a great power, and it seemed that this would end the era of magicians. But events unfolded differently. Strange events were taking place in a deep dungeon with torches on the walls providing dim lighting in the dark basement. Sitting on his hunches, the guard asked the prisoner why magic was needed and claimed that only weak and insignificant creatures of the lowest order used it. Before him lay a young man in special shackles that were impossible to break, and nothing could help him escape from his chains. His hands were also bound. His body was covered with abrasions. He was exhausted, and his long white curls lay on the ground. The young man's name was Young. With annoyance in his voice, he told the guard, Cone, that he hadn't changed a bit and smiled bitterly in response to the cold stare. Puzzled, the guard asked maliciously what the prisoner meant and what he was hinting at, sensing some kind of trick. Recalling his childhood, Yang remembered his opinion that most magicians were born into peasant families and believed that Crony was simply warning him. At that time, he constantly impressed upon the boy the need to hide his abilities, otherwise he could be expelled and humiliated right in the mansion. But now, the hero realized that the servant was jealous of lower magic. And when Yang said so directly, the overseer was shocked by his words. Enraged by the truth, he swung his arm and, shouting at the young man to shut up, struck him in the face with all his might, unable to contain his anger. When the boy collapsed exhausted on the floor, he exclaimed that it didn't change anything because the power was completely in his hands. Stepping on Yang's head with his foot, he declared that Yang was getting in his way and must finally disappear once and for all. Glaring at him maliciously, Crony said that it seemed the young man wanted to die, and pulling out his sword, he announced that he had to do it and had no other choice. Without letting go, he said that as a relative, he would ensure a quick death. And Yen, seeing the sword before his eyes, opened them wide. Suddenly, a draft swept through the corridor, and the candle flames flickered as someone hurriedly ran through the dark corridors of the dungeon. At that moment, a servant entered and informed the warden that there was urgent news from Duke Hill requiring an immediate response. Gritting his teeth, Cone turned around, angry and irritated because he had been prevented from dealing with John and finishing what he had started. Leaving the young man lying on the stone floor, he told the servant that he would be there in a moment and headed resolutely for the exit. After a while, the hero sat down and could not believe that this was how his life full of struggles and trials was to end. Recalling the past, he thought that he had done everything possible and hoped that at least someone would preserve his memory about Duke Janvero. But gradually his body weakened and he began to lose consciousness. Everything was as if in a fog floating before his eyes. Through the darkness of his consciousness, he heard someone shouting. A stranger addressed him as Your Highness and begged him to wake up, her voice trembling. Opening his eyes, Jean saw Nam and asked how she got there. But the girl said there was no time to explain and that he needed to run. Stopping her, he confessed that it was thanks to her that he had become a magician and even an emperor. Looking at the moon in the sky shining through the lattice windows, lowering his head and with tears in his eyes, he said that he was giving up and would not fight, deciding to leave everything as it was. Nam asked in bewilderment if he had forgotten about the building for magicians next to the Second Imperial Palace. As a child, he often hid there and cried, and the girl assured him that if he went there, he would have a chance of salvation. Back then, the young man always listened to her, and they read various books on magic together, trying to understand the secrets of ancient spells. Now, she didn't know what had happened, but taking him by the shoulders, she sincerely believed that he could handle everything. Suddenly, everything was illuminated by a bright yellow light, and a protective dome appeared. Yang asked her in alarm what was happening. Noticing the blood running down her arm, he realized that the girl was drawing symbols with it right on the cold stone ground. In horror, he shouted for her to stop the dangerous spell immediately because it could end in tragedy. But the girl replied that it was too late because the blood had already been spilled and the process could not be interrupted even by her power. In an instant, a blinding flash of lightning lit up the space, followed by a deafening and terrifying explosion. Crony burst into the chamber and asked in horror what they were doing, his eyes widening in fear at what he saw. An unusual magical glow filled the space, illuminating the dungeon with bright light, and the spell began to take effect. With a smile, Nahum said that God does not send misfortunes that cannot be overcome, while the servant behind him swung his sword to strike. In an instant, the floor was covered with scarlet drops of blood spreading across the stone slabs, instilling fear and horror in all living creatures. With one blow, Kon killed the girl, and Yang watched in horror as her lifeless body fell onto the cold stone floor of the dungeon. Looking at the corpse, Nam could not believe that all this was really happening, and felt as if he were in some kind of terrible and endless dream. Lifting the bloodied sword, the servant declared that the young man should pray that he would never see the light of day again. The floor was once again covered with scarlet drops of blood. This time, the ruthless guy had dealt with him. But the hero did not know that this was only the beginning. Yan's head was filled with the girl's last words about God, trials, and faith, which now seemed almost prophetic to him. Like fragments, he remembered his past. How he once became a powerful emperor and ruled an entire empire. How he spent time with Gnome in a secret mansion of magic. And after everything ended up in this dungeon, without understanding what he was guilty of. His last memory was the girl's smile, which vanished in an instant and was now just a bitter memory. Thanks to magic, he seemed to float in a strange weightlessness, feeling his body disappear and his soul gradually reborn. Looking at his reflection, he saw his younger self as he was many years ago and could not believe his eyes. Amazed by the miracle, the sun's rays gently illuminated the tops of the pine trees, breaking through the foliage and creating a feeling of comfort and tranquility. Amidst the forest stood a luxurious mansion with spacious grounds decorated with fountains, gardens, and flower beds. The Count's loud voice echoed through the palace corridor, his sharp words reverberating off the stone and marble walls. Looking at Yen, he shouted that the young man did not even know how to walk and ordered him to get up immediately, brooking no objection. Nearby, the Countess and the boy laughed at him, saying that they had taken him in only out of pity for his mother, because there was nothing special about him. The lady asked with interest whether the Count considered the young man his son, but the man sharply ordered her to watch her words and not to speak like that in front of Sir Malene. Trying to get up, Jan felt his head spinning and did not understand where he was or who all these people were. So he asked the Duke, but the Duke again demanded that he get up. Once on his feet, the young man looked around at the strange interior and asked who all these people were and why they were looking at him so wearily and coldly. Seeing his reflection in the mirror, the hero was very surprised because he saw himself, but in a completely different form. Puzzled, the young man looked around with wide eyes, not believing that he was seeing all this in reality. In a malicious tone, the Duke told Yang to stop disgracing his father and to behave with dignity in front of Sir Mullen, because this meeting could decide his future. Looking at him, the young man did not understand which emperor was being referred to, but decided not to ask any questions and remain silent. Angered by the young man's expression, the man took out the imperial decree and showed it to him, trying to prove his words. Explaining, he said that he had not shown the document to the young man because of his illiteracy. But Yang knew that he had not issued any decrees. Discouraged, he stood in the middle of the corridor, wondering who could have taken his place and whose body he was now in. Opening his eyes wide, he saw the date, and his heart sank with incomprehension, for everything that was happening had disrupted the usual order of his life. Looking closely at the decree dated 1100, the young man realized that all this had happened 98 years ago, long before he was born. Suddenly, someone snatched the document from his hands, and Yang froze, not understanding why everything around him was happening so quickly and abruptly. It was Shell, who asked irritably why his brother was studying the documents for so long, when he couldn't even read and was just wasting time. Walking ahead, the Count said that he had to work hard to bring the central administrator for the ceremony. Behind him, the hero heard the maids whispering that this was the first time he had encountered such a thing and wondering what Yang would do this time. Glancing at his watch, he thought he had found himself in the year 1100 and knew nothing about the current emperor, whom everyone mentioned between words. In the mirror reflection, the hero saw a stranger's face and could not believe that it was him, as if reality itself was playing a cruel joke on him. Suddenly, he imagined himself with the girl holding the watch in his hands, the era rushing backwards, and the young man trying to understand what was happening. Remembering Naeum's spells, he realized that the result of her magic had turned back time and transported him to the past century. It was the height of summer outside. The sun flooded the mansion with light, and the dining room windows offered a view of a well-kept green garden. In front of the young man was a plate of meat and vegetables, the food looking appetizing and exuding a tempting aroma. Cutting off a piece, Yang put it in his mouth and savored the taste, which was so different from prison food. The Countess and his older brother, Chell, stared at him in bewilderment, their eyes wide open, as if they had seen something incredibly strange. Wiping his mouth, the young man did not understand what was happening, because after starving in prison, He was used to eating cautiously and in small portions. With a smile, Molin, holding a glass of wine in his hand, said that this was how proper table manners were displayed. Noting the Sir's kindness, the Count asked him to speak with the Emperor, and the man assured him that he would definitely do so. The man noted with interest that the study of philosophy was now very fashionable, and asked John what he thought about this field. As if suddenly realizing something, he first turned to the elder son and asked which philosopher he liked, which greatly embarrassed the disconcerted Chell. The young man tried hard to remember at least one philosopher and LT, Unk NGT, his name, but nothing came to mind, and his thoughts were confused. Looking intently at his brother, Jan realized that Molin was trying to test the level of education in this family. To keep the conversation going, the hero said that he liked fine, and the Sir was surprised that the young man was familiar with the thinker's works. With a smile, the young man added that the sage's humanistic ideology helps to understand the path of a monarch, and Molin was delighted. While the Countess ate silently, the Count said with a smile that the gentleman was clearly flattering them, and remarked that it all seemed too simple. In a serious tone, the man noted that the Duke's son was so intelligent that not only the Emperor, but also the barbarians would take notice of him. Hearing these words, Yang wondered who they were talking about, and assumed they were referring to the Night Barbarians, their formidable neighbors. There is only one territory in the world called Brock, on the border of which live the warriors of the clan and the powerful empire. Lost in thought, the hero asked if it was true that the family had signed a peace agreement with the warlike clan. Suddenly, his father placed his hand on his arm, bringing him back to reality and interrupting his heavy thoughts about the future. With a smile, the Count said he was sure the young man would soon become a symbol of peace. But Yang remembered that he would one day be given to the barbarians. In order not to disturb the idol, the hero smiled and agreed with his father, although his heart told him otherwise. Outside, the mansion looked peaceful, but inside, a scandal broke out, disrupting the fragile family peace. The Count's eldest son yelled at Yang, claiming that he did not become a nobleman just by joining their family and had no right to humiliate him. The hero confidently replied that if he had not been considered part of the brothers, they would have sent Shill into exile instead of him. In a rage, the man grabbed a vase and, shouting at the young man, was outraged at how he dared to speak to him like that and swung at him. Suddenly, the vase slipped from his hands and shattered into pieces on the tile floor with glass shards flying in all directions. While Yang watched silently, his brother shouted that he would die like his mother and that a mere piece of trash had no right to contradict him, but should only follow his instructions. Listening to all this, the hero was filled with anger and resentment, and his heart yearned for justice. After the humiliation of his own mother, a moment later, the young man's eyes filled with a strange light, and for the first time, he truly wanted to take revenge on his abuser, calling his brother arrogant. Yang used magic, and everything around him was illuminated by a yellow light, as if a fire had broken out. Blinded by the bright light and taken by surprise, Chell initially covered his face with his hands, trying to protect himself from the strange sorcery. Suddenly, he collapsed to the floor and opened his eyes wide, amazed at what he saw. Magic in real life and the young man's abilities. Unable to believe what was happening, the boy thought it was some kind of dream and that such a thing could not be real, that some kind of madness was taking place. Yin maliciously declared that his brother should watch his words and not talk nonsense with his long and malicious tongue about his mother. Looking at the young man, he said that otherwise he could easily be cut off, and there was a threat in his voice, and his gaze burned everything around him. Frightened, Shell covered himself with his hands, sitting on the floor, and begged Yin not to come closer and to leave him alone, afraid that his brother might hurt him. Suddenly, the hero heard a noise behind the door and turned sharply, sensing that someone was heading straight for the office where they were sorting things out. Molin entered the room and, ignoring what was happening, suggested that the boys calm down and have some tea. When Sir opened the door, Yan's magic still filled the room, and the air was thick with energy and tension, the glow illuminating the space. With amazement and incomprehension, the man froze in the doorway, watching something he had never seen before in his life. Soon, the Count and his wife arrived, and noticing the gentleman's reaction, asked what had happened. But Molin was unable to find the words, stunned by what he had seen. Slamming the door open, the father asked angrily what had happened, his voice sounding very threatening. Sitting on the floor, the eldest son tried to get up and find the words, but his whole body was shaking with fear and horror, and he was afraid to tell the truth. Coming closer, Yang patted his brother on the shoulder and said with a smile that he had only warned him to be careful with the vase. Turning around, he smiled and told Chell to get up quickly while the boy continued to stare at him in horror and surprise. Reaching out his hand, the hero offered to help him while the others stood silently, watching the scene in bewilderment, peering through the door. Angered, the Count demanded that Hannah take Jan to his room, for he no longer had the strength to tolerate such behavior. The dark-haired maid quickly ran up and obediently prepared to carry out the order, asking no questions and afraid to object. As she led the young man away, the girl asked him why he was so clumsy and strange and couldn't behave with the dignity befitting a nobleman. Hearing their conversation, Mullen tensed up and sensed something was wrong. Suspecting that what was happening could turn into an unpleasant and dangerous situation, the young people slowly walked through the corridors of the second building, which seemed much smaller than the main mansion and looked much simpler. Inside was a small room with a bed and a wardrobe, and everything around was made of wood without any frills or decorations. When Yang opened the door, he immediately noticed the modesty and plainness of the room, for there was nothing special here that reminded him of nobility. As he was about to enter, he suddenly heard the girl address him, and puzzled, he turned toward her, expecting a question. Suddenly, she said that she had a letter from his mother because the hero had cried every day and begged to send a message, but he himself could not leave. Feeling sorry for the fate of the hero whose body he now inhabited, Young realized that the poor boy had no way to escape and was like a prisoner in this mansion. In a calm tone, he assured Hannah that he would not cry anymore and asked her not to worry because now he was a completely different person. Suddenly, she asked about her food, and the hero turned to her in confusion, not understanding how this related to their current conversation. Bowing low, she explained that she had 5 brothers and sisters, and they ate only what Yang gave them. So, she asked him to take pity on them. Deeply puzzled, the young man did not understand whether he was now obliged to give away his food and remain silent, thinking about a possible solution and weighing all the consequences. After a short pause, he said that he agreed to give away his food, but only on one condition, which greatly surprised the maid. With a smile, he asked Hannah to help him in the future when he turned to her. And after a short pause, the girl confidently agreed, saying that she would return in the evening. She sincerely thanked her master and left the room, leaving Jan alone with his thoughts. When the door closed, the guy grabbed his head and cursed, realizing what a difficult mess he was in and not knowing what to do next. Knowing that magic transports a person to the place where they first appeared, the hero wondered why he had been thrown so far away and into a stranger's body. Pondering why he had ended up here in a time before his birth, Yin realized that he urgently needed honest answers. The only place where he could find them was the Ministry of Magic at the Imperial Palace, where the hero decided to go at all costs, racking his brains. He did not know how to get into such a heavily guarded place, but he understood that he had to do it at any cost, otherwise he would lose his last chance. Suddenly, the hero's room was illuminated by a strange glow reminiscent of the setting sun, giving the ordinary room a homely feel. Stretching out his palm, he saw a ball of fire light up on it, filling the space around him with heat and flames. Closing his hand into a fist, Yang realized that the body he found himself in had the ability to control magic and could withstand its power. What was incredible was that he had possessed a man who from birth had enormous potential to become a powerful mage and a great spellcaster. Remembering himself in the guise of an emperor, the young man suddenly realized that they had the same name. And this discovery seemed very strange and disturbing to him. Puzzled and lost in conjecture, he could not believe that such coincidences, seemingly mystical and fateful, could exist in the world. Suddenly, he heard Hannah's voice outside the door. The girl had brought food, but the hero replied that she could leave everything right there without coming inside. A little later, he opened the door, saw the food left on the doorstep, and sighed heavily, thinking about how much his life had changed. There was a piece of bread and a glass of milk on the plate. And Yang immediately realized that someone had taken part of his meal as a reward for his hard work. But even under these circumstances, looking at the tray that had been brought to him, he wondered if this small dinner was too meager. Recalling his lunch with Mayor Mullen, he sighed heavily, remembering the feeling of fullness and abundance of food on the table, which he now sorely missed. Even then, with the huge variety of food, he noticed that there was no gully among them and realized that it was missing. It was a nutritious fruit that formed the basis of the burial diet, which had fed people for centuries and saved entire families from terrible famine. It was once considered a weed, and the seeds in the pits were poisonous. But after the discovery of a safe method of consumption, mortality rates dropped sharply by 85%. Holding the tray, Yang suddenly realized that this discovery would only happen in reality in 50 years, far in the future, and no one suspected it yet. Thinking that if he had shown how to use Gulu correctly, he caught himself thinking that perhaps there would have been no famine in the empire at all. Then he came to the Count's office, and the man told him the important news that the day after tomorrow, there would be a reception attended by advisors coming directly from the capital. In a serious tone, Yang replied that he would do his best and try not to disgrace the Brock family in front of such important people. Suddenly, his father announced that a package had arrived from his mother. And upon hearing this, the young man was stunned and opened his eyes wide in surprise. From the desk drawer, he took out a small white cloth bag, a gift from a loved one of his adopted son. Explaining that there were a couple of coins and a letter inside, he handed them to the young man and suggested that he ask his teacher to read it aloud. While the young man was examining the bag, the count added that if his son behaved well, he would be able to see his mother before leaving for school. Yang politely agreed when suddenly a servant entered the office and called out to the Duke in a quiet voice, clearly bringing important news. Without answering, the man kept a calm and cold expression on his face, hiding his excitement, and just stared silently ahead. Suddenly, he stood up abruptly and left the office, leaving Yang alone, and only the rustling of papers and the faint smell of candles remained in the room. The door slammed shut, and after a while, the hero heard someone talking behind the wall, which made him curious and anxious. They were talking about some cold boy, and the young man stared at the entrance in surprise, trying to understand who they were talking about and what it all meant. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a tall stack of papers lying on the table, and he decided to go closer to take a closer look at them. Making up his mind, he took a few sheets and wanted to study their contents, hoping to find something important that could shed light on what was happening. With great interest, he began to read the lines because, in fact, he had long been able to read, although those around him considered him illiterate and stupid. Comparing the papers, the young man could not believe his eyes when he discovered numbers and records that did not match at all and clearly concealed something. Realizing that he was looking at double accounting, Yang concluded that his father was stealing taxes intended for the treasury and the capital's treasury. Deciding that this was too brazen, the hero thought that it was precisely because of such suspicions and violations that Sir Molin had been sent here from the capital. Suddenly, he heard the door creak and saw it slowly open, and his heart began to beat faster from the fear of being caught. His eyes wide open, he panicked, thinking he was about to be discovered, and deciding not to take any chances, he quickly concentrated to use magic. Directing his power, Yang extinguished all the lights in the office, instantly plunging the room into darkness, hoping that this would save him from exposure. The count who entered asked in surprise why all the lights had suddenly gone out and glanced around the room, trying to understand what had happened. Following him, the servant replied that they had recently changed the lamps and that something had apparently broken again, assuming that a malfunction was to blame. After suggesting that candles be lit, the young man suddenly cried out loudly, and the Duke turned toward him in bewilderment, slightly frightened. Apologizing, the butler said that he had simply tripped over something, and the owner, not paying much attention, told him to gather up the papers and fold them neatly. Suddenly, the man noticed Jan and was very surprised to see him there because he thought the boy had left long ago and was no longer in the office. With a sharp movement, the count went to the window and pulled back the heavy curtains, letting the sun's rays into the room, filling it with light. When everything became visible, he looked questioningly at the young man, waiting for an explanation. But the hero remained silent, trying not to give himself away with unnecessary words. Stepping away from the table, he continued to stand motionless and humbly while his father looked straight at him with cold anger and a heavy, suspicious gaze. In his outstretched hands, Yang still held the bag of coins sent by his mother, and it looked as if he was defending himself with the gift as a shield. Suddenly, the count's attention was drawn to the papers on the table. He noticed that they were lying differently than before and immediately suspected something was wrong with his son's actions. With irritation and anger, the man asked what exactly the boy was doing there, but he calmly and with a smile said that his father had not told him to leave. Sitting down at the table, the count announced that the Unnearly clan was demanding a letter signed by January, and the young man asked in surprise why this was necessary. Saying that the barbarians were a constant headache, he asked the hero to correspond with them from time to time, assuring him that his teacher would help him write under dictation. After these words, he said that his son could leave, and the young man obediently followed the instructions, trying not to arouse unnecessary suspicion and anger in the count. When he left, the door creaked shut behind him, and the echo filled the space with this strange sound. Stepping out into the hallway and looking at the letter, he heard the count wondering why his mother was writing to her blind son on expensive paper and whether she was writing at all. Beginning to read the message, Jan learned that she was doing well thanks to Durga's care, and she tenderly inquired about his own affairs. Walking down the hallway, the hero read every line carefully, trying not to miss a single detail and trying to grasp the hidden meaning of the words. From a message, he learned that his mother was delighted with her son's new family and asked him to fulfill a request if he ever went to a distant desert. After reading the note, Yang smiled, realizing that his suspicions about the strange had been confirmed. Now, all that remained was to confirm his guesses with facts. In the evening, when the moon silenced the sky, important guests from the capital arrived at the mansion, and the entire Brock family held a solemn reception for them. Bowing, Durer thanked the Count for the invitation and said that it was a great honor for him to be in his house and sit at the same festive table. Another guest respectfully kissed the Countess's hand and introduced himself as Mac, which made her smile and show him respect. In the garden, a small pond covered with water lilies sparkled, and the stars were reflected in its calm surface as if someone had poured the sky directly into the water. At the table, Sir Mullen noted Jan's magnificent attire, and the young man replied that he had been looking forward to the meeting for a long time and wanted to ask about life in the capital itself. With a smile, Mac asked what exactly aroused such interest in the young man, and a lively spark of curiosity flashed in his eyes. The hero asked with interest what exactly they ate at court because it was important for him to know how high society and the royal family actually lived. In a calm tone, Dayer said that there was nothing special about the capital. The rich ate better and more, while the poor made do with what they could. At the end, he added that the nobles still lacked variety in their food, and the young man asked with interest what kind of food he was referring to. Deciding to express his thoughts, he asked what would happen if a new food, previously considered useless, appeared that could feed the poor. The young man's suggestion left the guests frozen in silence, unable to utter a word, simply stunned. With a smile, Max suggested discussing this unusual idea with the prince himself, assuring them that he would like such bold and innovative proposals. Surprised, Yang asked who exactly he was talking about, as he had never heard of a prince who was interested in food. Explaining, Digger said that the Empire had His Highness Gale, and he had always shown particular interest in new talented people. Recalling, Yang realized that they must be talking about Gale Vurian, the very one who raised the magician's rebellion and ultimately suffered a terrible defeat. Suddenly, he caught himself thinking that all these ambassadors were this man's people and had come here for their own benefit. With smiles, they assured him that the young man would definitely become friends with the prince. But the hero understood that it was better not to get close to enemies and thought only of using them. Putting his wine glass on the table, Milton noted with regret that time had flown by too quickly and that he would like to continue the important conversation later. The man politely asked if the Count would consider his request rude, and the host, frowning slightly, agreed to listen to him. Unexpectedly, Milton asked if he could take a walk alone with His Excellency, and the Count asked in confusion if he meant Jana. Agreeing, the man said that he would send Chell with them, but Sir was only glad, and the young man himself did not want to and was even afraid to stay with his brother. Wiping his sweaty forehead with a napkin, the boy went out into the garden and asked the guests if they had already arrived, trying to hide his tension and extreme fatigue. Turning to him, Mac replied that they were almost there and noticed that the Count's eldest son looked extremely exhausted. Feeling Milton's heavy gaze on him, he suggested that Shell take a little rest, realizing that he was clearly unwell. Leading the young man to a bench, Dorr said that they would catch up with Sir and Jean later, trying not to let the eldest son collapse in the middle of the walk. With a smile, the hero said that he understood the situation perfectly, asked him to take care of his brother, and headed forward with his guest. Looking at the smooth surface of the lake, the man noticed that the last time he had seen a golden glow in the hero's eyes, which looked very strange and frightening. Stopping at a gazebo overlooking the garden, he asked the young man directly if he was a magician and looked at him intently, waiting for an answer. An awkward silence hung in the air, and Yang wondered whether he should admit his abilities, as it could be very dangerous. Deciding to keep the secret, he smiled tensely and said that he did not understand what they were talking about, trying to hide his excitement and not give himself away. Milton said warmly that Prince Gale was always happy to meet magicians because magic was a great gift that could change the world and the fate of entire nations. The young man asked doubtfully if that was the only reason Sir was showing such interest, and there was a hint of irony and slight distrust in his voice. Puzzled, Milton asked what exactly the young man meant, and the hero replied that the man was clearly interested in his powers, not only because of the prince. Looking at his reflection in the water, he decided to change the subject and said that he was sure the guest had other important questions for him. Looking at Jan, Milton remained silent, and his gaze betrayed his hesitation, as if he did not dare to ask what he really wanted to talk about. When the hero asked if Sir was there to investigate the embezzlement of tax funds, the man became visibly nervous. Reassuring his interlocutor, he admitted that he also needed something from Milton and, putting on a serious face, offered to make a mutually beneficial deal. Surprised, Sir asked if Jan really wanted to bring him Brack's double accounting, because such documents could change the fate of the entire family. With a smile, The hero asked what the man would offer in return, since embezzlement of public funds was a crime that could also affect him, reminding him that the young man was not yet a member of the family. The man explained that if he delayed the adoption process, the young man would avoid responsibility and conscription into the army. With a smile, Yang turned around and said that his request was completely different and that the calculations and papers were only a means to an end, not the ultimate goal of the negotiations. In fact, he needed help to protect himself from punishment at the emperor's court, and he also wanted to obtain land for his personal and full ownership. He said decisively that he was ready to join the warrior clan, even without adoption, just to stay out of suspicion and gain a reliable rearguard. Milton asked in bewilderment if the young man really did not know where the clan lived and what life was like there. But the young man confidently showed that he understood the consequences. He explained that if he told anyone about the embezzlement, his father would suspect him, so he needed a place where he would be protected and safe. Having a clan of strong warriors at his disposal was advantageous, and the young man asked with interest if Sir would take him and his mother under his protection. Sighing, Milton seemed to decide to change the subject and said that he had to return to Shell, who still hadn't caught up with them in the garden. With a smile, Yang agreed and realized that the man was not ready for such proposals, as they were too abrupt and direct. Bowing, he said he would stay here, and Sir allowed him to enjoy the views of his native home, leaving the difficult conversation behind. After saying goodbye, the old man left, leaving the young man alone with his thoughts and unspoken plans that could determine his future fate. Recalling this, Yang realized that it was at this time that the Brock family had collapsed, and now he had to act faster than he had planned. Realizing that he would not be allowed into the palace in his current status, he decided to seize any opportunity, even if it was risky and dangerous. After giving the double-entry accounting journal to Molin and framing his family, he knew that his next step had to be to take possession of the Count's estate. Clenching his fist, he was more determined than ever, realizing that he wanted to change his fate and stop being a pawn in other people's games and intrigues. But first, he needed an alliance. And Jean believed that his first task was to befriend the clan of other worldly warriors, gaining their support and strength. Lost in dreams and plans, the young man gazed for a long time at the smooth surface of the water in the garden, and the reflection of the moon in the pond seemed to push him toward a decision. Turning around, he suddenly saw a woman in a long black cloak, and his heart skipped a beat. The vision seemed unreal and frightening. His eyes wide open, he could not believe what he was seeing. Standing before him was a figure he did not expect to meet here and now. Standing with her back to him, she was holding a pot with a red lily in her hands, as if she was going to give something to someone and was waiting for a meeting. Running up behind her, Yang grabbed her shoulder, his fingers trembling, afraid that it was an illusion, but the warmth of her skin told him otherwise. Shouting in surprise, the woman turned around in fear, and her face lit up with disbelief, joy, and bitter longing at the same time. With a smile, Yang asked how she was doing, and her eyes immediately filled with tears because she couldn't believe that her son was standing in front of her. With bitterness, she asked how he was doing and said she was happy to see him, even if the meeting would be short and painful. She confessed that Hannah had brought news that she should come to the third pond to meet her son, and at first, the woman did not believe her words. But the girl insisted confidently and decisively, saying that the meeting was possible right now, and the mother agreed with hope. Touching her palms to Jan's face, she looked into his eyes, and he said that he was fine and had already received her package. He also apologized for his infrequent letters because his heart ached for her, but circumstances prevented him from being close and writing more often. Suddenly, he remembered something important and decided to ask his mother right now, while he had the chance, and she was looking him in the eyes. Showing her the bag of coins, he asked if she had sent them to him, but the woman was surprised because she had never had such gold. Handing her the bag, Yang told her to take the money and prepare for the journey, and that he would let her know the exact date of departure through Hannah. Taking it, the lady asked anxiously if something bad was happening because her heart already foresaw trouble in separation. Kneeling down, she said that if her son wanted to run away from the Count's house, then let him run away because she had once sent him there with pain in her heart. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she said that if it was hard for him, he should run away rather than endure abuse and danger. Taking her hands, the hero tried to calm his mother, assuring her that he would cope and do everything to protect her and himself from trouble. Suddenly, she noticed that her son's eyes lit up, and she excitedly told him about it, as if she saw it as a sign of change. Smiling, Yang assured her that he would not run away, and said that he would stay here because he had a plan and knew what to do next. Holding her hand, he asked his mother to promise to fulfill all his requests because their future depended on it. At that moment, he heard Milton and his guests calling him, and afraid that they would see his mother, he said it was time for him to leave. As he said goodbye, he asked her to take more ghouly seeds with her, explaining that they would be useful later and help them in the future. Letting go of her hand, he told her to take care of herself. But the woman suddenly stopped him, as if she wanted to give him something important and personal. Holding out a pot of red lilies, she told him to take them, reminding him that he used to love caring for these flowers. With joy and gratitude, he was happy that she had brought these particular flowers, as they reminded him of his childhood and home. The next day, walking down the hallway with Shell, Yang noticed that his brother looked tired and said that he had seen his weakness yesterday. The guy asked in bewilderment if they were really going to start training today, and the hero replied that their father had allowed them to train together. Reassuring him, Yang said that the first training session would not be difficult, that the captain would take their strength into account while a stranger listened attentively nearby. Standing up and showing his yellow teeth, the man addressed the young gentleman with a bold look, as if he wanted to test the guy. Coming closer, he asked what brought him there, and the young man explained that he just wanted to see the arena where future fighters trained. Staring at him, the captain asked why, since he had never been here before, and the sharp smell of alcohol on his breath and the coach's arrogance angered Shell. He resolutely admitted that he was not in the best shape and wanted to train to learn how to stand up for himself in the future. As if offended, the man walked ahead and invited the boys to follow him, promising to show them everything that was hidden in the training grounds. First, he showed them a large area, then warehouses and tents where the fighters rested during horseback training and hard workouts. Moving on, he wanted to continue his story, but Yang and Chill heard a loud bang and stopped, looking at each other in confusion. Turning around, they saw a man with a whip and half-naked young men standing on their heads and asked who these strange people were. Explaining, the captain said that they were orphans and added that if Yang hadn't been lucky, he could have ended up among them too. Suddenly, Chell asked Theo to stop beating the orphans, and the hero was very surprised by his brother's bold action, as he was usually silent. Among the young men, he noticed a red-haired guy who stood upright and, unlike the others, did not collapse despite the pain and screams. The guard watched them maliciously and shouted while the captain said that the boy's name was Bar-Eric and spoke of him in extremely unflattering terms. Suddenly, they heard loud screams, got scared, and moved away, trying to hide and figure out what noise had so abruptly caught their attention. Bar-Eric was screaming, and Chell noticed that this red-haired young man was no joke and that it was better to stay away from him to avoid trouble. Rubbing his head, the captain noted that despite his insolence, this guy could still be useful in the business and bring certain benefits. Suddenly, a whip flew through the air, but the man stopped Theo in time, preventing him from hitting the orphan and causing possible serious injury to the young body. Unable to stay on his feet, Bar-Eric fell to his knees, and the captain noted that this guy was not very skilled, weak, and clearly not ready for hardship. He stared at them with a malicious look, his eyes burning with hatred and rage, his mind filled with thoughts of punishing his offenders. Moving on, the man said that the young man had no special talents and was incapable of accomplishing anything significant despite all his efforts. He explained that sometimes, no matter how hard a person tries, success cannot be achieved, and it is important to understand in time that it is time to stop trying. Yang and Chill looked at him with admiration, but each was thinking about his own thoughts, trying to understand the meaning of his words while assessing his own abilities and strength. Suddenly, the captain met Yan's gaze, and they stood silently, studying each other as if trying to guess each other's inner thoughts and intentions. After asking if they were finished, the hero suggested taking a break in the shade so that they could continue their training with full strength. Looking at the exhausted Bar-Eric, he said that he did not want to watch him suffer and hoped that the orphan would be able to cope with the pain on his own. The bright sun illuminated the treetops, and Yang reminded himself that he too could have been there, experiencing fear and pain. Coming closer, the hero asked if his name was really Bar-Eric, and the red-haired guy lying on the ground turned to him, not hiding his surprise and tension. With a smile, he asked if the orphan could get up and try to stand so he could continue his training. Angry, the orphan asked who he was, and Yang introduced himself, explaining that he had come with good intentions and wanted to help. While Shell, Theo, and the captain stood aside, the orphan rudely sent him away, and the hero noted his sharpness, rudeness, and obvious desire to act independently. Grabbing him by the chin, the guy said he would pretend he hadn't heard anything and watch the prisoner's reaction. With abrasions on his body, Bar-Eric broke free from the grip and deftly dodged, demonstrating flexibility, strength, and reflexes that could surprise any observer. Lowering his head to the asphalt, he asked the hero to leave and leave him alone, showing a desire to figure things out on his own and not attract unnecessary attention. Pouring a strained elixir directly into the young man's mouth, Yang knew that magic was dangerous for ordinary people, but a person with potential might experience only a slight rejection. Watching Bareric's reaction closely, the hero was curious to see how the orphan would react to the magical potion, and whether he would feel the power hidden in this unusual elixir. Lying on the ground, the captive felt a strange energy passing through his entire body, causing warmth, tension, and strange sensations. Suddenly, his pupils lit up, and Yang felt a faint magical ability confirming his guess about the orphan's hidden potential. It was the energy of a magical swordsman, and the hero realized that he was right in his assumptions because the power was clearly manifesting itself and responding to magical influence. Suddenly, with a single movement of his hand, Bareric knocked the flask out of his hands, demonstrating strength, precision, and sharpness of movement that surprised and slightly frightened the young man. The container flew away and fell nearby, and the boy watched the unexpected surge of rage that began to manifest itself in his actions and gaze. Angrily, Barrick asked what had been mixed into the water, his gaze full of distrust and anger, his voice trembling with emotion, betraying his tension and irritation. Staring intently at him, Jan calmly replied that there was nothing in it, trying not to provoke the orphan, but at the same time observing how his hidden energy manifested itself. Noting that the prisoner was feeling better, the hero said he would go on with his business, leaving him perplexed. Standing up and looking at his body in surprise, he noted that he really did have much more strength, as if his energy had increased. Puzzled, he tried to call out to Yen for an explanation, but the hero had already left, and the orphan remained alone, pondering the strange events. As he left, the guy paid no attention to the orphan, who silently watched him go, not knowing how to explain his new feelings. Looking at the flower, Yin decided to write a letter to his mother, telling her that he was doing well and that he was coping with all the difficulties and trials. Remembering the lyrics of a song, he decided to write about the moon and that there was no endless darkness so that she would understand his mood and not worry. With his pen on beautiful paper, he wrote each letter carefully so that his mother could read and understand him, feel his care and attention. His teacher sat next to him in the office and checked his spelling, helping the young man avoid mistakes and make his message as clear as possible. As he was about to leave, he stood up and the young man thanked him for his help, noting that his support was important and helped him keep his thoughts clear. Noticing the man's behavior, the hero asked if he really had so much to do since he was always rushing somewhere and never stayed long. Puzzled, the tutor stopped and asked again, and Yang noted that the teacher seemed somehow different lately. Not knowing how to respond, the teacher hesitated, but the protagonist said that it was okay and that he didn't have to answer if he didn't want to as long as he didn't get distracted or rush. Putting his papers in his bag, he tried to avoid answering, but the young man noticed this and said that everything was fine, trying to reassure him. A tense sweat appeared on the mentor's face as he tried to find the words to explain, but he couldn't. Leaving the teacher, the hero sat down at the table, and the teacher, putting his bag on his shoulder, said he was leaving Yen alone to think. Suddenly, something strange caught his attention, and the guy looked at the ground, noticing a small piece of paper that the man had dropped. It was a sheet of paper with information on it, and the protagonist decided to pick it up to study its contents, which could be important. It turned out to be an article about climate change, the details of which could affect the young man's plans and actions. Later, they went with his brother to practice running under the scorching sun, and Chell kept asking how much longer it would take, showing fatigue and tension. Running ahead with Jan, the coach said there were only 40 minutes left until the end of training, but the boy didn't hear him because he was too far away. Continuing to run, he sped up and the boys tried to catch up with each other and the coach, giving it their all to finish all the exercises on time. There was a beautiful building nearby, but suddenly Jan heard a scream and turned around in confusion, trying to understand what had happened. An enraged, Bareric flew at his opponent with a sword in his hands, his movement swift and powerful, his gaze radiating fury and determination. Wielding his weapon, he tried to strike his opponent, but the latter deftly dodged, demonstrating his agility and training. Then, with anger, the orphan tried to reach him with his hand, but the stranger dodged again, showing that the fight would be intense. Delivering blow after blow, he switched to hand-to-hand combat while the young man screamed and covered himself with his hands, trying to understand how his opponent moved and how to repel his attacks. Their swords clashed in a measured battle, but neither was going to give up, each trying to find a weak spot and use it to win. The young man cursed furiously and barely managed to hold off the orphan's attacks, trying not to show too much aggression so as not to miss and leave himself vulnerable. Jumping high, Barrera shouted fiercely, demonstrating his strength and determination to win, forcing the young man to focus as much as possible. Stepping back a little, the guy told him to stop behaving like that and calm down, demonstrating control over the situation and a desire to end the conflict. As he walked away, he heard the orphan address him as Mrail, which caused surprise and tension, as that name had a special meaning for him. Stopping, he asked angrily how he dared to say his name out loud, showing that it was unacceptable and violated his personal boundaries. Still standing with his weapon in his hands, the orphan declared that the winner had not yet been determined, demonstrating his tenacity and willingness to continue fighting to the end. His eyes glowed with a thirst for revenge and a desire to win at any cost, showing his inner rage, determination, and commitment to achieving his goal. Puzzled, Meryl asked if the boy wanted to die, trying to understand his intentions and test his readiness for the possible consequences. Approaching him, he kicked the orphan in the stomach with all his might, and Bar-Eric fell, not expecting such a turn of events and not having time to defend himself. Calling him names, his rival asked if the young man hadn't understood the first time. While the guys on the bench laughed, watching the boy's awkwardness angrily, Meryl said that if he continued to show off, he would not last long, demonstrating severity and warning the prisoner. Sitting exhausted near the boxes, Bar-Eric said he didn't want to fight, showing confusion and a desire to avoid further confrontation. Silence followed. The sun was at its zenith. But suddenly, he heard someone call his name. Seeing Jan in front of him, he asked with annoyance and anger in his voice if it was that annoying young man he had seen before. Not wanting to talk, he told him to go away, but the hero replied that he had to find a way to defeat Myril. The orphan asked maliciously if the boy was suggesting he used cheap tricks and said that he didn't do that kind of thing, to which the boy just smiled calmly. Grabbing his sword, the prisoner threatened to kill him if he kept talking, showing his irritation and unwillingness to listen. With a smile, Yang said he felt sorry for Bar-Eric, showing kindness and a desire to help despite the prisoner's aggression. The orphan swung at him, but the hero stopped the attacker with a single movement of his hand, demonstrating his speed, strength, and superiority. With burning eyes, he said he would help him, but in return, the boy must help him, setting conditions and demonstrating control over the situation. Holding his hand on the orphan's head, it suddenly glowed with a strange light, causing Bar-Eric to freeze in confusion, not knowing how to react. His body seemed to be filled with a strange energy that permeated the space around him, and he began to smile, feeling the power within himself. The magical glow and influence spread around, flashes resembling lightning appearing in different places. Letting him go, Yang stood up and decided to watch the young man's reaction, carefully observing how he would behave after the tense events. Suddenly, Bar-Eric jumped up and rushed forward, and the hero watching him assumed that this was exactly how the situation would unfold. As Mariel walked away, the captive rushed to attack, and the young man realized that they were not his accomplices because his power manifested itself in an unusual magical way. Feeling something strange, the young man turned around, wanting to say something, but froze in shock, not understanding where his opponent's unusual power came from. Suddenly, Bar-Eric appeared next to him, catching him off guard and completely disrupting his plans, which surprised everyone present and caused tension. The young man's eyes burned with a magical light. He was full of determination and readiness to act, not noticing Miles' emotions. With one blow, the orphan knocked his opponent to the ground, demonstrating strength and accuracy that no one expected to see from a young but daring captive. Holding him tightly by his jacket, Bar-Eric ignored the boy's protest as he tried to reason with him, explaining that this was not the right thing to do. Unwilling to listen to him, he began to punch his opponent in the face, showing aggression and indicating that he had no intention of stopping. In an instant, the asphalt around them was covered with more and more scarlet drops of blood from Meryl, who was unable to defend himself. The guys sitting nearby, seeing the carnage, were shocked and did not understand how a young kid could display such strength and fury so quickly. Deciding to help, they rushed to his aid, asking what Bar-Eric was doing and trying to intervene. But the young man continued to attack with unprecedented fury. Swinging again, the orphan wanted to strike, but they stopped him, thinking that the young man had completely lost his mind, not believing their eyes. Grabbing him, they knocked Bar-Eric to the ground, trying to calm his aggression and stop the absurd but brutal fight. Lying there like a madman, he raised his head and laughed, showing that he felt no fear or pain and did not care about what was happening. With a smile, he said that he had been waiting for this moment for a long time and it was foolish to turn away, thinking that it was all over and not finish what he had started. The guys pushed his head into the ground again, and after hitting it a few times, he calmed down a little while the captain rushed over to them, trying to restore order. Seeing this, the coach gave instructions to send Mile to the infirmary and Bar-Eric into custody to prevent further conflicts and restore discipline. Suddenly, he caught someone's gaze on him and froze for a moment, not knowing what to do next and afraid that he would be punished for the fight between the prisoners. Deciding to turn around, he greeted Sir John, who was watching the proceedings closely and hiding his emotions. The concerned captain asked if Bar-Eric had done something wrong, but Jan replied that he had only listened to a bunch of obligations. Noticing the strange atmosphere on the field, the coach suggested ending the training for the day while the beaten boys were being led away, and the hero agreed. Watching the orphan, he asked how he would be punished, and the man said that first he would be flogged and then expelled, which seemed unpleasant to the young man. Surprised, he asked again, realizing that he wanted a completely different outcome for the captive. But this was also not a bad option. Thinking that if the orphan was on his own, Yang decided that Bar-Eric would be much more useful and would learn to use his skills consciously. After training, he met with Milton and the guests for tea and asked if they had made a decision regarding the deal that could determine their common future. The seer lowered his head and remained silent while Mac and Dor looked at him in surprise, not understanding what he was talking about or how it related to their duties. After thinking for a moment, he said that the Count was well-versed in such matters, so they needed evidence and would require assistance. Agreeing, Jan said he would gather data on the amount of grain, mineral production in the Mona Mountains, and taxation of farmers. With a smile, Milton said he was pleased to see the young man's determination, appreciating his ability to make important decisions in difficult circumstances. Bowing, he was confident that this would determine their future and expressed his respect for the hero, acknowledging that he had a lot of work ahead of him. In response, the young man thanked Sir Milton and realized that he had been right in his assumptions, appreciating the significance of the meeting and how important it was for all parties to agree. Noticing that the brooch on the man's jacket was the same as the one on the sheet of paper that the teacher had dropped, he decided that there was some kind of secret agreement between them. Continuing to drink tea, Yang decided to use his observations in the future to plan his actions and take into account the hidden plans of others. After the meeting, he decided to take a walk and think about his future, his opportunities, and the need to strengthen his position. Suddenly, someone grabbed him sharply by his jacket, and he did not have time to do anything to defend himself. The stranger dragged him forcefully around the corner, not allowing him to break free or resist, demonstrating his physical strength and determination. A servant standing in the garden heard a strange noise, but did not turn around, thinking it was just ambient sounds, unaware of what was happening and the danger to the young man. When he asked his colleague if he had heard anything, the latter just laughed, not paying any attention, thinking it was nothing serious that required intervention. They agreed that it was wild dogs. While behind the building, Barrett grabbed Yin, demonstrating unexpected courage and strength. In a calm tone, the hero noted the unusual greeting and asked how the orphan had ended up here, trying to understand the reasons and circumstances of the sudden attack. Like a madman, the young man did not take his eyes off him, but remained silent, displaying strange behavior and tension. Suddenly, Bar-Eric said that he had been arguing all night, but the senior butler told him that he could come here at any time. Staring intently at him, Jan noticed that the boy was not taking his eyes off him and thought that Count Brack was involved in this. Sharply tightening his grip, the orphan asked maliciously what drugs the hero was using and noted that he felt uncomfortable when meeting him. Calmly, the character replied that he did not use such cheap tricks, demonstrating confidence and control over the situation. With a smile, he said that Bar-Eric was brave but not very smart, that the water he gave him was from his supplies, and that he didn't even touch him. Widening his eyes, the orphan did not understand what was going on and tried to comprehend what was happening, wondering why magic and energy had such a strong effect on him. Taking the young man by the hand, Yang said that he could satisfy his curiosity and was ready to explain how energy and magical abilities worked. In return, the hero asked him to promise him something, and the orphan's eyes widened in surprise at the seriousness and unusual nature of the proposed deal. Smiling with shining eyes, the character told the boy to keep quiet about his golden eyes and magical abilities. Seeing the glow, Bar-Eric cried out loudly, and the hero asked him not to be so rude, trying to keep the situation under control. The guy was angry and wanted to argue, but Yang, continuing to explain the use of magic, ordered the captive to always be his bodyguard, which surprised the orphan. Touching the guy, he said that what he felt was the power inside him, and it could be used if he learned to control it properly. Touching his chest with her finger, it suddenly glowed with a bright light, revealing the presence of magical energy and surprising Barrick. Clenching his fist with his glowing torso, he asked in surprise about magic, trying to understand how it worked and where it came from. With interest, Yang asked if the guy had heard of magic or magical sword skills, and upon hearing a negative answer, he grabbed his head in horror. Promising to tell him everything, he asked the boy to listen carefully, and the young man looked at him with interest, ready to absorb the information, explaining that there are people in this world who are able to find resonance in their souls. The character said that this manifestation is called magic. He also explained that Bar-Eric had potential, but his abilities blocked his energy, so training did not help him fully unleash his power. Finally, Yang said that the orphan should use his skills, and he asked in surprise if they really prevented him from manifesting his power. Continuing his explanation, he said that they needed to follow a path that would connect the energy of the body and soul in order to unlock their true potential. Rushing forward, Barrick joyfully asked if the hero would continue on this path for him, but the character pushed him away and asked him to listen carefully first. The orphan persisted, asking what he needed to do, but the hero asked if he was sure of his decisions, explaining that he would have to protect him everywhere. Seeing no problem with this, the boy said that he had no home or family anyway. But the character explained that he could die, and the boy agreed. With a smile, they made a deal and shook hands, confirming their agreement and mutual obligations, preparing to work together. Holding his hand, Yang understood how stubborn and carefree Barrick was. But it was this quality that made him strong and able to survive in battle. Remembering how he saw him for the first time, the hero realized that he was the right person for the role of swordsman. Because the stronger a person is, the more unique their character and skills are. Thinking about how the orphan wielded weapons, he knew that such people did not accept defeat and did not give their opponents the opportunity to strike, showing tenacity and strength. Barrick's fierce gaze suggested that such people are not afraid of death and can stand up to the enemy, even if the situation seems hopeless. Standing motionless, shaking hands, Yang realized that a warrior who is not afraid to die has no equal, and his determination makes him dangerous and strong. Gradually, the orphan's body was filled with strength again and illuminated with a strange light, demonstrating an increase in energy and potential. Watching the energy fill the boy's body, the character realized that Barrick was now capable of displaying the abilities of a swordsman. Squeezing his hand tightly, the hero offered him friendship, assuring him that together they could overcome any trials and protect each other. Arriving for lunch, Yang heard the Count's reproaches from the doorway. His voice sounded stern and demanding, but he calmly moved toward the table. Ignoring his father's lectures, the character sighed heavily, thinking about his own and upcoming tasks, focusing on his plans and ideas. While the man talked and drank wine, the young man was falling asleep, but suddenly noticed the ring on his hand and was surprised by the man's love of jewelry. He had not noticed Dirg's interest in diamonds before, but the Count never took off this ring, which aroused Yan's curiosity and suspicion. Thinking that it was a wedding ring, the hero immediately dismissed the idea because the stone on the ring was cut in the simplest way without any precious sparkle. Looking closely at the jewelry, he thought that this ring was not intended for beauty at all, but perhaps had a hidden function. Suddenly hearing a strange sound, the hero realized that he had heard it before in the Count's office, where he had also been wearing this ornament, which heightened his suspicion. Wondering what Dirge was hiding, he thought about the possible purposes of the ring and what secrets and mysteries might be connected with his father. Noticing the young man's reaction, the Count exclaimed that he should stop counting crows and start eating. While the Countess and Shell dined quietly without interfering, he asked with interest about the young man's new friend, and the young man asked again about Barrick in confusion, trying to understand how important this conversation was. Explaining, the hero said that he had first seen him training with his brother, but thought he would never see him again after what had happened. The Countess asked with interest about what had happened, and Jan explained that the orphan had attacked another person, which puzzled the lady. Not understanding how her adopted son could befriend the boy who fights, she was indignant. But the hero replied that he didn't care who he was friends with. Smiling, he listened to his new mother's advice not to neglect his studies, agreeing with her words and realizing the importance of education. In a malicious tone, the Count said that if he did not learn to read and write within 3 months, he would blame Barrick and order his execution without hesitation. Meanwhile, in the garden by the fountain, Milton and his teacher were discussing something, going over important details and future steps necessary for their plans. The sister asked hopefully if the man could handle his instruction, and the man bowed obediently, assuring him that he would complete the task well and on time. Suddenly, feeling someone's gaze on him, he turned around sharply, surprised by the sudden attention, and noticed that strangers were watching him. Holding a sheet of paper in his hands, Yang asked where the teacher had gone, and it turned out that he had been talking to the sir, which raised questions for the young man. As if apologizing, the man said that he had only exchanged a few words, but the character noted that he had been gone for quite a long time. Taking him by the hand and handing him the paper, the young man explained that the emperor's influence in the province was weakening and that his father was in a state of sluggish conflict. With a smile, he asked what Dudgy would think if he found out that a capital official was talking to his son's private tutor in a secluded place. Bowing his head, the teacher assured him that it was just idle talk and asked if it was really so difficult for the young man to pretend he hadn't seen anything. Feeling tense, the man waited for Yang to respond. And Yang replied that it would not be difficult to turn a blind eye to the situation, but only on one condition, surprising his mentor. Explaining, the hero asked the tutor to talk to his father for half an hour in the garden tomorrow. Hearing the request, he was surprised but agreed to do so. Saying that this was not all, the young man handed him a sheet with an article about the desert and asked him to get a map and information about the climate in late spring. With a smile, the character said that he hoped the teacher was a smart man and understood what he was getting at and that the task would be carried out correctly. Bowing, the man assured him that he understood everything and was aware of the student's goal, preparing to carry out his order as accurately as possible and without unnecessary questions. Magical energy lit up the space around them again, casting strange glare reminiscent of small fireworks. Measuring the space with his fingers, Yang tried to determine the diameter of Durg's ring, concentrating on the size and details of the precious jewelry. The image of the ring was reflected in the glow, and the young man estimated the size of the stone, but realized that there was one problem with the accuracy of the proportions. Sitting in front of blank sheets of paper, he did not understand how to draw the jewelry, so that all the details matched the original and were as accurate as possible. Deciding to give it a try, he began to swing his pen, drawing the image, focusing on the details and shapes to get an exact copy. Suddenly, Hannah entered the room and called out to him, drawing his attention and distracting him from his work for a moment. By that time, Jan had finished, and she noticed that the hero had drawn a ring and written something, paying attention to the illustration. Looking closely at the sheet, the girl said that the jewelry resembled what the Count wore, marveling at the accuracy and similarity to the original ring. Admitting that she was right, the hero explained that his father never parted with it, even though he did not like diamonds, and that this had caught his attention. He noted with surprise the sharpness of the maid's eyes, marveling at her attention and ability to see details that might escape the ordinary gaze. Still, he found it strange that Duji had decided to make a key out of a diamond, wondering why a precious stone had been used. Thinking about why there was a diamond ring, Yang suddenly realized that it did not conduct electricity, which gave him a new clue about its purpose. Remembering the secret drawer in the Count's office desk, he realized that it had a protective mechanism that used electricity and the ring could be a lockpick. With a smile, he said that thanks to Hannah, he had an idea and asked her to find a carpenter who could make a replica of the ring with a rubber coating on top. The next day, the teacher came to the Count's office to fulfill Jan's request, preparing to distract the man and allow his son to enter the office. With a smile, he said that the conversation would be long and thanked Duji for agreeing to give him time to discuss important details. Leaving the office, he asked the Count to follow him, and the man obediently followed without asking any questions. In the hallway, he suddenly asked why the teacher wanted to talk and why they needed to go somewhere. Meanwhile, Yang watched them from around the corner and prepared to carry out his plan, thinking through the details and controlling the situation. Silently, they headed for the mansion's doors, saying nothing, only understanding that a serious and important conversation was coming. Hannah was with him, and he asked her to get the fake ring needed to carry out the plan and imitate the key. Taking the jewelry out of the white cloth, the girl handed it to Jan, demonstrating the accuracy of the copy and the neat execution of the details. Examining it in his hands, the hero noted that it was similar in size to the original, and the layer of rubber on top ensured its reliability. Thanking her for fulfilling his request, he gave her a handful of coins, hoping that it would be enough to feed her family, and she was beside herself with happiness. As he left, he asked her to stand guard, and the grateful servant agreed, understanding the importance of the task and the need to be vigilant. Turning around, Young asked if Bararik was ready to carry out his task, assessing the orphan's readiness and his understanding of the importance of the responsibility entrusted to him. Reluctantly, the boy asked why he had to do such things, showing doubt and concern about the possible consequences. Taking his hand, the hero explained that the guard must not let anyone into the office, demonstrating the seriousness of the task. With burning eyes, the orphan replied that he would cope with the task, showing confidence and determination, ready to fulfill his duties regardless of the difficulties. With concern, Jan explained that Bararik's role was very important, and if he failed, the whole plan could collapse. Entering the office, he approached the table and noticed a strange bowl with contents on top, attracting attention and raising questions about its purpose. Groping for the opening, he finally found it to insert the duplicate ring, carefully manipulating the objects and controlling his actions. With one deft movement, he managed to open the desk drawer, demonstrating his dexterity and skill, as well as his precision in completing the task without unnecessary effort. When the hiding place opened, the hero froze in amazement for a moment. Struck by the simplicity of the device and how easily he had managed to overcome its protection, the young man was delighted that everything turned out to be easier than he had imagined. realizing that the task would not require excessive effort. Looking at the papers in the box, he realized that they were letters from the clan of other worldly warriors, but he did not understand their content as he did not know their language well. Taking a blank sheet of paper, he decided to rewrite the letters so that he could study their meaning later, focusing on the details and the possibility of understanding the information completely. For a moment, he thought that if he added a date and a seal, it would give the document authenticity and create the impression of an official document. Deciding to carry out his plan, Yang took the Count's stamp from the table and decided to put his idea into action without fear of the consequences. The Treasury would definitely check this report against the Count's tax records, which would increase its value and convince the auditors of the authenticity of the information. When he was done, he began to fold the papers, thinking that he needed to put everything back as it was so that his father would not notice anything. Suddenly, he heard someone outside the door ask if the Count was in his office, and he froze in horror, realizing that he might be seen by a stranger. In an instant, a servant entered the office and, seeing Yin with papers in his hands, was very surprised, not understanding what the young man was doing. Realizing that he was in trouble, the hero decided to use magic to hide his actions and temporarily neutralize the guy's attention. In an instant, everything around him was filled with a strange light and energy, and the secretary began to forget what was happening. When the Count returned to his office, he found the servant lying motionless on the floor and thought he had gone mad, not understanding the situation. Standing by the table, the butler did not understand what was happening to his colleague, while Dudgy was furious and thought about what measures to take. Banging his fist on the table, he suddenly gave the order to get rid of the servant, and the man asked in surprise, not expecting such harshness. Suddenly, Dudgy shouted for the servant to be removed and all his property confiscated, while the rest of the staff stood frozen in amazement behind the doors. The maid and the boy rushed out of the estate and hurried away, fearing the Count's wrath and wanting to save their lives. Meanwhile, Bar-Eric, eating an apple, asked how the conflict between the servants and the Count had ended, showing concern for the course of events. With a smile, Jan noted that it had been dangerous, but everything had been resolved, while the orphan was indignant that he had nearly died because of his risky actions. The young man asked with interest whether Dudgy had found out that the assistant had searched his office, and the character studying the papers asked what difference it made. Remembering how the assistant had caught him with the papers in his hands, he realized that his father believed that he was the one who had searched the Count's office. Fulfilling the request, the teacher drew a map and made a weather forecast, pointing out important points and possible dangers along the way to prepare Yin. He also told the young man to be careful, as there was a high probability of sandstorms that could interfere with the journey. He also attached a note, and the hero racked his brains over the question of who would succeed him and how this would affect the future. Looking at the papers, he didn't understand how important it was to put them in the safe and thought about the seriousness of protecting these documents. Realizing that this letter was addressed to someone, he thought that it was about an otherworldly clan of warriors, and he began to guess what his father's next steps would be. Suddenly, Bar-Eric approached him and said that he understood that the black thing in Jan's hands was text and the white paper, and the hero noted the guard's success. Threatening with his finger, the young man told the orphan not to talk nonsense and asked if he remembered what the hero had told him. The orphan obediently nodded in response. Standing at attention and saluting, he repeated the instruction to throw away the key, give the papers to Molin, and send a message to Philia on the way back. Barrick enthusiastically said that he must convey to Yan's mother the request to leave, hide, and collect Gyuli seeds, showing that he understood the order. Pleased that the servant remembered everything, the hero praised him. But the boy just laughed, noting that it was all very simple and required no special effort. Looking out the window, Jan noticed a thin horse in the courtyard and a servant in a strange robe, which aroused his interest and made him watch.